Expectations are high for the Chicago Bears in 2024, but it doesn't have to be playoffs or bust for Caleb Williams' rookie season to be a success.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on all of your favorite social media platforms, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and of course, the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use our promo code LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. On the show today, we go through this upcoming Chicago Bears season with predictions and expectations. We'll look at the schedule, now that we have a better sense of this team and all the other teams the Bears will be facing. We'll look at the biggest strengths of the team, the areas where we might need to still be concerned entering this season. We'll look at the most important Chicago Bears players and coaches who could break out this season and who a lot still hinges on. And I want to wrap up looking bigger picture at what does success look like this season and what does failure look like and how do we set expectations based on that. I want to start, though, with the big predictions, looking at what we should see from this Bears team this season, because you get a wide range of perspectives on this. I think the more local perspective, the Bears fan or the Bears homer in the media kind of aspect is thinking double-digit wins, playoff spot, and maybe even a playoff run if things really go well with Caleb Williams. And I think you get some national perspectives that are a bit less optimistic on this team and say they might be still closer to 7 or 8 wins and not quite there yet to make that big postseason leap. Of course, the over-under for their win total at FanDuel Sportsbook has been set at 8.5, which is literally 500 because you can't go 8.5, but that would be halfway between 17 games. And so that's where I think the baseline expectations go. Personally, I see this team as better than an 8-win team, but I'm not sure how much better than an 8-win team. But I think the floor for this team is about 8 wins. And everything beyond that will be a factor of how good Caleb Williams is, of course, but also some of the key questions in the group surrounding him. How good his offensive line is, which is going to be based a lot on how healthy his offensive line is, and also how good this defensive line is. To me, those are kind of the two biggest questions about this roster outside of Caleb Williams' development. Is the pass rush going to hold this defense back? And is the offensive line going to hold this offense back? Because I think we have pretty solid confidence that the weapons on offense, the skill positions around Caleb Williams will be good. There are proven players at every spot in that group. And in a similar vein, on defense, the back seven will be good. There are proven players at every position. We've seen most of those guys be very good on this Chicago Bears team. So it's the two question marks on the offensive and defensive line, plus Caleb Williams' development, that will determine how good you think this Bears team will be based on your confidence in those groups. So if we were to look at this Bears schedule more broadly, I look at this team as a 9-8 team this season. And certainly the game-by-game, week-by-week prediction is always kind of a fruitless effort because by the time we get to week 10 or week 15, other teams will suffer injuries and players will be better or worse than we thought. And so the prediction you make for a week 17 game against the Seahawks in September is not going to be the prediction you make for week 17 versus the Seahawks, the day of or the day before. So I don't like to spend too much time going okay, well, I think they're going to lose this game but win that game. I do think generally they're around a 9-win team. I think this Bears team is going to win a game or two that maybe they shouldn't, or that the experts don't think they will, because there's some volatility and Caleb's going to have a great game in that, or something's going to go well for the Bears that they overachieve in those matchups. And I think there's going to be a game or two that they lose that maybe you thought they really shouldn't have, because they are a team with a lot of new pieces and a lot of moving parts and some young players in some really key positions. And those are volatile and can have some really high highs and can still have some pretty low lows. I think generally over the course of the Matt Eberflus tenure, across whether the roster has been good or bad, mostly bad, but there tend to have been slower starts for Eberflus, and then they kind of figure some things out. So until proven otherwise, I'm expecting something similar this year. I mean, I think they'll lose to the Texans in week 2. I think they'll probably lose to the Rams in week 4, and it wouldn't surprise me if they lose to the Colts in week 3 and start out 1-4. But then you get to the really easier parts of the schedule where you play the Jaguars, you got a bye week in there, or excuse me, you play the Panthers and the Jaguars, you got a bye week in there, then the Commanders, Cardinals, and Patriots, and they could win 5 in a row in that stretch, and you'd be feeling pretty good at 6-3 after the first 10 weeks of the season. Then you get into this stretch where you have 5 divisional games in 6 weeks: Packers, Vikings, Lions, 49ers, Vikings, Lions. I think the Bears aren't quite where Green Bay is just yet. I think they should sweep the Vikings with their quarterback situation. I'm not confident that the Vikings are going to be all that good this season. They're not going to be the worst team in football, but I think the Bears should be able to sweep the Vikings. I do think the Bears will get one of those Lions games where the Bears played the Lions so well last season. I think the Lions are going to be good, but that's going to be one of those games where I think the Bears get one there that maybe you're not expecting them to. But I also think they're not going to get a Green Bay game when you feel like they should be able to beat Green Bay at least once this season, because Green Bay is not that good, right? And the Bears are a lot better, but I just get this feeling like they won't. Like that's one of the games that they should have won, but they didn't. And the Lions game feels like one of those that they should have lost, but they instead won. And maybe the Seahawks on Thursday Night Football is also one of those stuff. Like there's a handful of toss-up games on this schedule that, you could switch one of the L's to a W and one of the W's to an L, and I wouldn't fight you too much when we're talking about teams like the Seahawks or the Jaguars or the Rams or the Colts. Like those teams are still kind of up in the air for me, where I'm not super confident in predicting wins and losses in those games, and I could see those kind of games going either way, and the Bears usually kind of split the kind of games that go either way. But I think that leaves this team around 9-8 and right there in the playoff picture. It's just a matter of how the other playoff teams then finish. I think it will come down to tiebreakers as to whether or not this Bears team actually does make the playoffs. That they'll be 9-8 and the 7 seed will make the playoffs at 9-8. And it's a question of, is that the Bears? Is that the Rams? And we'll talk about some of the other different playoff teams in here. Is that the Buccaneers? Is that, there's going to be 3 or 4 teams, maybe even Green Bay, that's all around that same record. That ultimately only 1 or 2 of them can make the playoffs. Somebody's going to be held short, and I can't predict what the tiebreakers are going to look like at the end of the season. But that's how I think the Bears are ultimately going to end up finishing this one, and so much of that is going to be dictated by the health of this football team and the development of some of the young players. That's where, to me, the most impactful and most important Bears players lie. At those positions where they need guys who have an injury history to stay healthy, and they need young developing players to take that next step forward. So I want to go through whose performances are going to matter most to the Bears team, besides Caleb Williams, obviously, next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality candidates that are right for the role. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, because LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. I'm on LinkedIn. I bet you're on LinkedIn. And if you're not, you might not know that a lot of your friends, family members, and coworkers are all a part of the LinkedIn community. So it isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but they might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Obviously, this Bears season hinges almost entirely on how good Caleb Williams is as a rookie. That's all anyone's been talking about since the day he was drafted with the Bears. So we don't need to spend a lot of time talking about, well, if Caleb is good in this way, then this will happen. If Caleb's bad in this way, then that'll happen. We get it, right? Quarterback is the most important player on any football team, and especially this team where it's the number 1 overall pick and you've built around him. That's obviously going to be the case here. So I want to go through the most important Bears non-Caleb Williams division because, of course, he's always going to be number 1. And I think if we're going like who's next after Caleb Williams, the next most important Chicago Bear isn't even a player. And it's not really even your head coach, Matt Eberflus, because we know Eberflus, yes, he's in charge of everything. The buck stops with him, and the success and failure of this team ultimately depends on the job he does as a head coach. But like, I think even more important than Matt Eberflus, because he's calling the defense, but he's not the scheme guy. The next most important Bear after Caleb Williams is Shane Waldron, your offensive coordinator. How he calls plays and schemes this offense around Caleb Williams and around this Bears offensive line will be, I think, the most important factor into Caleb Williams' success and therefore the team's success as a whole. If your players are really good, the offensive coordinator's job is a little bit easier. If players are worse than you think or injured, and so you have backups in there, it puts all the more pressure on the offensive coordinator. And what he's able to do to keep Caleb Williams protected in the pocket, to give Caleb Williams his options in the pocket, to not be predictable to the opposing defense, to not abandon the running game, but be a balanced offense, to get the ball into the hands of a bunch of different playmakers and not be overly reliant on one playmaker or another, to have a balanced, competent, unpredictable offense that always has an answer for what the defense is going to be able to do. That is your offensive coordinator. More than any other individual player on offense, the coordinator is so critical to that. The rhythm of play calling, the sequence of play calling, we've seen that most recently with Luke Getsy. But if you've been a fan of this team for any period of time, like, have we ever seen a really good offensive coordinator in Chicago? Like, maybe like with Mark Trestman for a year, but his offensive coordinator was Aaron Kromer. Like, he wasn't a good coordinator, but it was a good offense. Like, or Adam Gase for 1 year was a decent offensive coordinator. Like, we really haven't seen a really good offensive coordinator. And not that Shane Waldron needs to be the next Kyle Shanahan or Mike McDaniel or Matt LaFleur or whoever, but like, don't leave us feeling like the offensive coordinator is a weakness or that you're always going to be outcoached every single week because your offensive coordinator just is one step behind most defensive coordinators on the other side. Shane Waldron is the most important Chicago Bear, not named Caleb Williams. From there, I think the next most important thing is the health of your offensive line. When I think about what's going to be most critical to the success of this Bears team, it's how well the offensive line plays. And I think we kind of have a sense that if this group stays healthy, they should be, at worst, good enough and could even be pretty good. But like, they should be good enough when Braxton Jones, Tevin Jenkins, Coleman Shelton / Ryan Bates, Nate Davis, and Darnell Wright, when you got your 5 starting players are healthy and out there, that line should be good enough. Unfortunately, that group has a history of not being healthy. And I think it's important that we put into the right context here, like just how unhealthy, because they all play at least 10 games a season. You're always going to get at least, 2/3 of a season from them. But every one of them, except for Darnell Wright, who's only played 1 year, has missed significant time in the last handful of seasons. Last year, 2023, Braxton Jones played 11 out of 17 games. Fully healthy his rookie season, but missed 6 games last season with injury. That could be 6 games of having your backup left tackle in there. If that's your only injury, you can survive that. But then you've got Tevin Jenkins, who hasn't played more than 13 games in a season, missed 5 games last year, 4 the year before that. Even Coleman Shelton, your center, played a full season last year, but 2 years ago with the Rams, missed 4 games with injury. Nate Davis missed 6 games last season, 5 games the year before that. Those 4 players have all missed time. Darnell Wright was played every game as a rookie. In theory, you hope he can stay healthy. But we're expecting to miss at least one offensive lineman for some period of time. And given the track record of both of your guards, especially, you could be missing more than one offensive lineman for a certain period of time. And that's what has such a big potential to derail this, because if your offensive line struggles, then your running game struggles, then your quarterback has less time in the pocket, tries to force more. There's such a ripple effect from there that has me very concerned about the health of this offensive line being super critical. To me, it's that, and then the progress of your defensive line and your pass rush are kind of the two big things that are most critical for this Bears team's success this season. It's Caleb Williams and Shane Waldron play calling, and then it's health of the offensive line and your defensive line developing. It's DeMarcus Walker getting back closer to what his peak form might look like. It's Austin Booker and Darrell Taylor coming off the bench, giving you rotational pass rush snaps that are actually valuable and not just a body out there that gives Montez Sweat a break. Obviously, I think we expect Montez Sweat to continue to just be great, and we try not to take that for granted, but it's nice to be able to just say, you know what, Sweat is set. The linebackers are set. The secondary, pretty well set. But they need Gervon Dexter and Zach Pickens to take steps forward on the defensive line. And to me, if I want to go individual players that are most critical for the Bears' success this season, besides Caleb Williams, because we've been talking coaches and groups, Gervon Dexter is near the top of that list. He is your top interior pass rusher. He had 2.5 sacks last season. They need more from him. Everyone has really high expectations for Dexter. I think we need to temper those. We did a podcast earlier in the preseason about it, so I don't want to rehash the whole argument there, but essentially, defensive linemen transitioning from college to the pros usually take 3 or 4 years before they really hit their stride of what they're going to be in the NFL. If you look at a lot of the top defensive linemen in football, not named Aaron Donald, their sack numbers are low in year 1 and year 2 and usually year 3, and it's years 4, 5, and 6 that it really takes off. But very rarely do you see a defensive tackle take a huge leap in year 2. Usually it's very modest. I expect Dexter to go from 2.5 sacks to 5, not 2.5 to 8 or 2.5 to 10, like some people have been hyping him up for. It's very rare for defensive tackles to do that. Maybe he can, but I'm not going to expect that and then be disappointed when he doesn't. I'm going to expect doubling his sacks from 2.5 to 5, which is still asking a lot to double your production from one year to the last. If he does less than 5, given the amount he's going to play, that will be a disappointment. But he's not going to, I just don't want to expect the 9-sack breakout season where he takes the league by storm. It's too early to expect that from such a raw player the Bears are developing. Another really critical player who needs to take a step forward, Tyreek Stevenson at cornerback. Another one we had this conversation about. One of the most targeted cornerbacks in football last season. Gave up some of the most yards of any cornerback in football last season. But also had among the most interceptions and pass breakups of cornerbacks last season. Every opposing quarterback will look to find the biggest weak link in your secondary and attack that. And they're not going to attack Jalen Johnson. They're probably not going to attack Kyler Gordon. They're going to attack Tyreek Stevenson. The pressure is going to be on him to take that step forward and not be the clear weak link in the secondary. If he can keep making interceptions and pass breakups, it certainly makes up for it. But year 2, with a really good secondary around you, need to see more progress from Tyreek Stevenson, absolutely. And then a name on offense that isn't talked about a lot as one of the most important Bears players, I think, is Coleman Shelton at center. That's such a critical position on the offensive line to set the protections, to call out the signals, to make sure everyone is on time with the cadence, and then obviously just clean snaps to the quarterback and keeping the top of the pocket secure so that it doesn't collapse in Caleb Williams' face. He's going to face a really nice test against the Tennessee Titans in week 1, and we'll get a good sense of just how good Coleman Shelton is. But it's felt like with the Rams, they were fairly happy to let him go. He wasn't bad for them, but I think the Rams looked at Coleman Shelton as an average center. And we'll take an average center in Chicago, but you'd like an above average center if you can get that out of him. But much like Gervon Dexter, I want to set proper expectations so we're not disappointed if Coleman Shelton struggles sometimes, because he has struggled sometimes over his career, and that's okay. But they need him to be as strong as possible on that interior with 2 experienced guards next to him. That should help so long as those guards are able to stay healthy, which is one of the big questions that we struggled with this season. And that's, I think, the injury questions about the O-line and the questions about the pass rush's development is why I see this as a 9-win team and not a 10, 11, 12-win team, because I think the offensive line is going to get hurt and miss some guys, and that's going to hold them back a little bit. And I think the pass rush isn't going to be great and maybe below average, and that's going to hold them back a little bit and not fully reach the kind of potential that the most excited Bears fans see of what this team could be. They're not going to be 100% of what they could be, but they'll get a lot of the way there. Now, if they miss the playoffs at 9-8, does that mean the season was a failure? Does that mean it wasn't a success? I mean, I think there is a line somewhere there's something in between success and failure here, but I want to look bigger picture as okay, year 1 of Caleb, year 3 of Matt Eberflus. What do we really need to see from these, and what can we not afford to see from this team this season? We'll try and set realistic expectations so that we can look back and later say, okay, how did they do based on how we thought they should do? Next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by PrizePicks, the best way to play daily fantasy sports. It is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. It's easy and exciting because unlike other daily fantasy platforms where you're setting a lineup against other people's lineups and you have to be #1 out of 500 or however many people submit to that contest, your odds aren't very good. But with PrizePicks, it's you against the numbers. All you do is pick 2 to 6 players and their stat projections and whether they will pick more or less than their PrizePicks projection. They've got a cool Bears-related promo going on right now where all you need is Caleb Williams to get 1 passing yard, and you get 1 win on PrizePicks every week throughout September. All you have to say is more than 1 yard from Caleb Williams. That's what it's set at, is 1 yard from Caleb's, so that you can get an automatic win every football weekend in September. 4 free weeks of free W's with your PrizePicks. So don't miss this deal because it'll be gone when September ends. Download the PrizePicks app today and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNFL on PrizePicks to get $50 when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. You just play with $5 and it's guaranteed $50 into your account. PrizePicks, run your game. We talk so much about the playoffs with this Bears team this season because, that's the goal every season. And it's to the point now where it feels like, boy, if the Bears don't make the playoffs, it's going to be a real disappointment because everybody wants Caleb Williams and the team. Oh yeah, they're going to make that jump. They're going to be in the playoffs this season. And I want to slow down on that just a little bit and feel like, obviously, we should hope that they can get to the playoffs. But I don't think this season is a failure if they don't make the playoffs. It doesn't have to be, we don't have to call it a success if they miss the playoffs, but we don't have to call it a failure if they miss the playoffs. We talked about it going through the game predictions in the first segment here, right? The Bears could easily finish 9-8, above 500, a step forward from where they were last season, right there with the Packers and some of the other playoff teams. But because of tiebreakers or whatever, you might fall just short of that 7th seed. Maybe you finish as the 8th seed, obviously, which wouldn't make the playoffs, but with tiebreakers, you finish as the 8th best team in football. And I don't think of that as a failure. I think a truly successful this season is 9+ wins in the playoffs, right? That's the goal. That's what we're shooting for. That's not out of the question. It's not unrealistic to say, yes, the Bears should win 9 games and make the playoffs. But if they win 9 games and miss the playoffs, is that a bad season all of a sudden? If a tiebreaker is the difference between them being in the playoffs and not being in the playoffs, does that mean a tiebreaker is the difference between them being successful or not successful? To me, this can be a successful season if Caleb Williams looks the part and this Chicago Bears team makes good progress. If we get to week 18, win or lose that game, make or miss the playoffs. If we get to week 18 and this Bears team looks like, wow, they're really close to something special here. And if you could just restart the season with the team that you have in week 18 and restart week 1 with that team, they'd make the playoffs. But they had to go through a lot of the sort of learning curves and growth bumps. Not growth bumps? What's the word there? Growing pains, I guess, along the way. And darn, the team that plays the final 6 games of the season, if you took that team and played 17 games, they'd win 10 of them and make the playoffs. But they just weren't quite all there right away to start the season. And that's okay. Like, that's the key phrase. And that's okay. We just need to see that this offensive coordinator is the right offensive coordinator and can call a good offense for Caleb. Even if that wins 9 games and you miss the playoffs, if you feel like, wow, we've got the offensive coordinator, we've got the quarterback, and we've got a lot of great pieces around him that are just really close, and we just need one more offseason of a couple free agent changes, a good draft class, and then all the young players in your team keep developing, getting better. Like, that's what we need out of 2024. The Bears don't need to make the playoffs to say this was a successful, good season. Because realistically, if this Bears team makes the playoffs, they're probably going to lose that first playoff game. I mean, you never know, but this Bears team is not going to the NFC Championship game or the Super Bowl in year 1 under Caleb Williams. It's just not a realistic expectation. So if they make the playoffs and lose in the wild card round at 9-8, or they miss the playoffs at 9-8, to me, that's the same season, more or less, right? I mean, they won the same number of games. Whether you're 9-8 and lose in the wild card round or 9-8 and miss the playoffs, you've still only won 9 games this year. So those are as close to the same season as you can possibly get. It's much more about how does Caleb Williams look, how does Shane Waldron look, and how close does the rest of this team look like a team that's going to be ready to contend? Does the talent level look like, oh, these guys are right on the cusp. They are ready to make that jump next season. Because whether you make the playoffs and lose right away or miss the playoffs, you're still going to want to feel like, are they ready to make that jump next season? This season is all about getting ready for the jump and looking like you're ready for the jump. The jump doesn't have to happen right now. So to me, it doesn't feel like playoffs or bust. It feels like progress or bust, right? Like advancement or bust. Because Matt Eberflus still ends up high on the odds of first coach to be fired. He's not number 1, but he's on the list of who could be the first coach fired this season. And it's also hard for me to envision a scenario where things go so poorly that they decide to fire Matt Eberflus. It's hard to even, I've been asked this question in radio interviews before, how safe is his job? What would it take for him to be fired? And to me, my answer is always if for the Bears to be bad enough that Eberflus gets fired, it would have to be a disaster that's beyond just the win-loss record. If they go 7-10 again, I don't think he's fired. I think we have some real questions, but I don't think they're going to fire him. This would have to be a 4 or 5 win team. They would have to go backwards from where they were last season. And it's really hard to envision what that is. It would take an off the field thing, where maybe another coordinator leaves mysteriously, kind of like some kind of, or an arrest of some, I don't even know of who at that point, but some sort of disastrous locker room implosion type thing where the Bears would feel like they have no choice but to fire Matt Eberflus. Even if, and I'm not going to say certain words out loud here, not to put it in the ecosystem, but even if Tyson Bagent has to start a bunch of games this season, I'm not going to say why, because I'm not going to put that out in the world. But even if for some reason that we don't have to say, Tyson Bagent has to start 8 games, 10 games, 12 games, and the Bears lose half of those and finish 7-10, they're not going to fire Matt Eberflus because he had to go to his backup quarterback for some reason that we're not going to say. You know what I mean? So it's not really to me about the wins and losses. It's about the team. And it's really hard to envision a scenario without some super crazy unforeseen disaster where things go backwards. I was going to say the A word, but I try not to swear on this podcast. Go butt backwards, and but again, it's like a nonsensical hypothetical that you'd have to come up with of there's just no realistic scenario where this team goes so far backwards that they decide to fire Matt Eberflus. I think his job is pretty much safe, barring an unpredictable disaster that none of us could foresee in any sort of realistic way, which, I mean, we saw some of that last season with the Allen Williams situation, and multiple assistant coaches changed, and those were the kind of things that I thought would get Matt Eberflus fired, and they didn't last year. So are they going to get him fired this year? If they were going to fire Matt Eberflus, it would have happened already. He's safe for this year. I don't know why he's on the firing coach odds, because it's just really hard to envision what that might look like. But I think that sets the table for what this upcoming Bears season is going to look like. That's where I think expectations should be, so that we don't get too high and then get disappointed, or we don't set them too low and be too pessimistic. I like to try and land the plane somewhere in the middle here, and I hope I did a decent enough job of doing that here in the podcast today. I would love to hear what you think the expectations should be for this Bears team. Where is your prediction? Win-loss record or just vibes? What does this team need to do to be successful this season? And what would a failure look like this season? Let us know in the comments here on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, or you can tweet us at Locked On Bears, post in the Locked On Bears Facebook group. You can comment on our Instagram and TikTok videos. However you do it, make sure that you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to the podcast, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. We have made it to week 1. The Bears play real regular season football. Congratulations. We got through the offseason together by being a part of this podcast. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. We'll be back for you on Monday. Make us your first listen again as we recap. We may even go live after the Bears game against the Titans, or at least some kind of post-game something or other. We'll put out there something for you, especially if it's a big game from Caleb Williams. So make us your first listen there. If you're looking for your second listen, check out Locked On NFL. It's a new version of Locked On NFL. 2 shows every day. First, the madman Tyler Rowland kicks you off with a double shot of NFL espresso, and then you can stop by the barber shop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. Add in the Locked On local experts, including me every Tuesday. I will host at Locked On NFL every Tuesday with Tyler Rowland, and you'll get unprecedented NFL insight across the board. Make these your second listen on Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Then come on back for another episode of Locked On Bears every single day for another opportunity to bear down.